wants to report a mental health emergency, which could save other people. What kind of message is sent when you do this? And you simply, basically the message is sent, if you call to help the mentally ill, we will kill you, or we will kill them.
Well, I think it's important to step back, and if you think about mental illness like any other illness, and you said this person was having a heart attack, let's call the police. We wouldn't be surprised that bad outcomes happen because that's simply not what a police officer is there for. What we need to do is get away from this situation where we wait until someone is in a crisis before we provide care. I think California has taken some steps, but even as we've been talking about this, there's been a broad discussion in California about misuse of the Prop 63 funds, which are funds that ostensibly were to be provided to mental health. And the Little Hoover Commission just put out another report that said, unfortunately, those funds aren't being used for mental health in the way that they should be. The tracking isn't there. And that's what we're talking about, is these situations we have far too many people ending up not getting care until they're in a crisis. And then we wonder why bad outcomes happen. And unfortunately, that's the case across the country. We simply have too many people in crisis, law enforcement trying to do their best in the worst case scenarios, and that's when these sort of tragedies occur.
We are now talking about, according to the figures in mapping police violence, Mr. Alongo became the 217th Black American to be killed by police so far this year. Ultimately, John Snook, the most important recommendation you have at this point, as we see what happened from El Cajon to Tulsa to Charlotte?
I think it's quite simple. We have to take mental illness seriously. We did, before this year, we basically weren't even able to really provide a very effective number of how many people with mental illness were killed by law enforcement officers. We know across the country that people with a mental illness are languishing in jails and emergency rooms because we simply don't have enough hospital beds for them. We simply aren't taking mental illness seriously. Finally, we're starting to see some movement. There's a bill on the Hill that's waiting for Senate action that would address these sorts of incidents, these issues with the most severely mentally ill, provide additional funding for police training, provide care.
Being with us of the Treatment Advocacy Center, joining us from Washington, Dan Gillian, attorney for the family of Alfred Alongo, the unarmed African-American man who was shot and killed Tuesday by the El Cajon police just outside San Diego. Dan also representing the officer Christine Greer, the plaintiff in a sexual harassment lawsuit against Richard Gonsalves, the officer who killed Mr. Alongo. And thank you so much to Christopher Rice Wilson, Associate Director at Alliance San Diego. This is Democracy Now! When we come back, we're going to talk about Syria, what is taking place there, what needs to be happening. What needs to be happening. Back in a minute.
You see what's going on, y'all? But maybe they was. You know, as they said back in the 1800s, all them days, deputized murderers. They would run around, and they would catch slaves if they were runaways or whatever, and then they would put them to death, or they beat them, or do whatever they wanted to do, take it back to the master, and let him handle it, and then, it's crazy, but I don't know what to do, man. We gotta be smart, y'all. And it's hard, because when you have a mental disability, you're gonna react. You're not gonna be proactive, you're gonna be reactive. It's different. Let's see if they come back.
Using ever more destructive weapons, know exactly what they are doing. They know they are committing war crimes. Imagine the destruction. People with their limbs blown off, children in a terrible pain,
Let's wrap up our full membership.
suffering, dying, with nowhere to go and no end in sight. Imagine a slaughterhouse. This is worse. Even a slaughterhouse is more humane. Hospitals, clinics, ambulances, and medical staff in Aleppo are under attack around the clock. According to Physicians for Human Rights, 95% of medical personnel who were in Aleppo before the war have fled, been detained, or killed. This is a war against Syria's health workers.
Video footage from Aleppo has emerged showing Syrian civil defense forces digging a young girl out from under the rubble. 5-year-old Ghassan Qasim was reportedly the sole survivor from an airstrike that killed 24 people in the Aleppo neighborhood of Al-Shar. Her entire family, including 4 siblings, were reportedly killed in the bombing. According to aid groups, children in Aleppo made up a large proportion of the casualties from the bombings. At least 100,000 children remain trapped in the eastern part of Aleppo. Meanwhile, Human Rights Watch has accused Syrian government forces of using toxic chemicals in 2 recent attacks in Aleppo that killed 5 civilians and injured dozens. The group also said new information has emerged indicating the self-proclaimed Islamic State, or Daesh, has recently used chemicals as a weapon inside Syria. On Wednesday, President Obama addressed the crisis in Syria during a town hall meeting in CNN.
The key in Syria at this point is, unless we can get the parties involved to recognize that they are just burning their country to the ground and get it on a diplomatic and political track, frankly, there's going to be a limit to what we can do. We will try to mitigate the pain and suffering that those folks are undergoing. This is part of the reason why our approach to refugees, for example, has to be open-hearted, although also hard-headed, to protect our homeland. But at the end of the day, there are going to be challenges around the world that happen that don't directly touch on our security, where we need to help lead, but just sending in more troops is not going to be the answer.
To talk more about Syria, we're joined by Osama Nasser, an activist in East Ghouta, a suburb of Damascus, an area controlled by the opposition forces. Can you tell us what's happening on the ground right now, Osama?
Good morning. Actually, you know that all the cameras and all the media is now fixing on Aleppo. That the cities that are being attacked by the Russian airstrikes and the regime, the Syrian regime force. Understand that maybe the American people and all, maybe most of the West, know nothing about our cause. They only know that there is ISIS, and there is people who are fighting for some reason or for no reason. You know that the regime has locked up all the independent media in here, and he's only the only media who are allowed to go there and there. Actually, people are really upset about what Mr. Obama said, what Mr. Obama does actually every now and then. The U.S. Administration did nothing to stop these ongoing disaster in Syria, and it became really complicated year after year and even day after day. You know that today is the first anniversary of the Russian intervention in Syria. So this means that 1 year ago, if the U.S. did something about Syria, they had nothing to. I mean, they were not obliged to do a marathon in negotiation with the Russians. 2 years ago, there were no, for example, bombing in this European country and in other places other than Syria and Iraq. 3 years ago, there were even no business. 4 years ago, there was no Jabhat al-Nusra. 5 years ago, there were only people who are seeking freedom and dignity and demonstrating very peacefully in the street. So the more you delay, or the more the U.S. and the international community are late to do something to stop this ongoing massacre in Syria, the more it becomes.
I'd like to bring in Yasser Munif into the conversation, a professor at Emerson College who specializes in grassroots movements in Syria. He's made several trips there, most recently in 2015 when he visited the Syrian-Turkish border. He's a sociology professor at Emerson College. Yasser, could you talk about why you think the recent ceasefire that was negotiated between the U.S. and Russia in Syria collapsed?
Thank you for having me. I think the main reason for the collapse of the ceasefire is initially the deal between the U.S. and Russia was not political. It was really only focusing on the military aspect of the conflict. And for the Russian, what was essential and important was basically maintaining the Syrian regime and making sure that the boundaries between the jihadist groups and the moderate military groups are blurred, and pushing most of the moderate groups into an alliance with Al-Qaeda and other jihadist groups. For the U.S., the goal of that deal was basically to collaborate and coordinate the strikes against ISIS. And in the end, the Syrian opposition or the Syrian population didn't get anything. The deal was basically offering to the Russian that they could maintain the Syrian despot. So there was total refusal and rejection of the deal by the Syrian population for obvious reasons, and it was basically reducing the revolution into a humanitarian conflict that would basically lead to opening few corridors here and there, and that some of the aid would reach the besieged areas in Aleppo and so on. But in the end, it was really benefiting the Syrian regime, not any of the opposition. And despite that...
Yasser, I want to turn to comments made by the UN Special Envoy for Syria, Staffan de Mistura. In an interview with Al Jazeera's Mehdi Hassan on Saturday, he explained why he thought the recent ceasefire collapsed.
Who do you think would not agree with the fact that the Syrian Air Force needs to be grounded? Well, obviously President Assad is clearly not happy about it. Otherwise, he would have been not able to do what he's been claiming publicly to do in Daraya and elsewhere, to reconquer the whole Syria territory. And to do so, he needs the Air Force. On the other side, put yourself in the place of the armed opposition and their sponsors. Do they really find it easy for them, or do they like the idea of disconnecting from al-Nusra, which in their view have been one of the biggest fighters against Assad, but at the same time everybody recognizes, including UN, is Al-Qaeda, regardless whether they change the name? Then you would have an answer who has no, at the moment, keen interest in a